Welcome to Best Decision Ever, where we believe that life comes down to very few moments and decisions. And that's why we're here to highlight the very people that have had the courage to overcome fear and make that decision to start that company, begin writing that blog, or just stand up for what they believe in. But on this show, we also know that success is only one part of the story. So we dive into the challenges that these people have had to endure to get to their current point of success, in hopes that we can learn their habits, their routines, and the mindsets that have enabled them to get to where they are so we can live inspired lives of our own. For those of you who are new, my name's John, and I would think of me as a performance enthusiast. I love surrounding myself with people who are at the top of their game so I can learn from them and live an inspired life myself. Today, we have a very special guest. She has a very unique background. She started in private equity, and her curiosity then brought her into the startup world, but more specifically, the growing and budding cannabis industry at California Dreamin'. And she joins us today after being named Forbes 30 Under 30 and starting the company Canix, the cannabis's only ERP system. So without further ado, I want to introduce Stacey Hronowski.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Good, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So I definitely want to get into Koenigs, but I know that one of the things you've spoken about a lot in interviews and just you and I talking right before this was really fixing or changing the perception that people in general have about the cannabis industry. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cannabis industry still faces a stigma, which honestly to me is pretty incredible considering the benefits it has medicinally, for sleep, for pain management, for creativity. And I think I take a lot of pride in showing people that you don't need to be a prototypical stoner to be a cannabis industry CEO. I get a lot of feedback, you're not what I expected, like when I wanted to meet the CEO of Canix, and I actually think that showing people that there's a different side, that you can come from a very classic software or finance background, and you can do really well in the cannabis industry, and that there are really smart people here. I take a lot of pride in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that definitely holds true. And just anything I've seen, whether it's from Canix or just from you in interviews, you really do a good job of showing the other side of the cannabis industry, as it were. With that said, do you mind talking a little bit more about Canix and like what it is, and just giving an idea for the people watching of what's going on in the cannabis industry right now? What is Canix and how's it helping?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically in the cannabis industry right now, you have all these companies springing up as states legalize. And a big problem that those companies face is that they don't have one system to run their business. And by run their business, I mean something to track inventory, something to track costs, something to do accounting and compliance. So what you have are these like amalgamations of Google Sheets and QuickBooks and Metric and all these other systems that people are trying to put together to get one clear picture of what's happening in their business. So Canix is a one-stop solution for cannabis growers, manufacturers, and distributors so they can get a clear idea of how they're doing, how they did in the past, and how to optimize for the future.
Okay. And do you mind telling us a little bit more about like how you found this problem? What was it like when you did find that this was something you really wanted to work on? What was that process like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a consulting gig for California Dreamin', and I had never worked in cannabis before, but I was so impressed by the founders of California Dreamin'. They were like former MIT crypto people. I honestly had my own stigma. I was like, had my own expectations of what cannabis industry professionals would be like. And it was really cool to see like that, no, like it doesn't, like there are a lot of different kinds of people in this industry, just like you would find in any other industry, like auto parts or HVAC or what have you. So that was just really, the CEO of that company, Amy, she left a big impression on me. I was so impressed with her. And the problem that I was helping them solve was essentially helping their salespeople take invoices from one system and put them into another system, because cannabis invoices have to be compliant. They take a really long time to create, and their salespeople really should have been focused on making more sales, not just doing this very manual, busy work. So that was the system that I built for them. And then they were like, this is really cool. Can you connect this to the other systems that we're using, like the compliance systems and the accounting systems? So I was like, absolutely. And I started doing more research. I started talking to more operators in the space, and I started getting, I was thinking it's cool that I have this opportunity to build this, but I'm a little surprised that something doesn't already exist like it would in other industries. So I did some more research, and I saw that like having one source of truth is a really big issue for most operators.
So it sounds like having that single source of truth, especially within the cannabis industry, it hasn't been around very long, is something that's really, really missing. And what was it like then trying to find a co-founder to join you in this industry? What was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty. There was a lot of serendipity in the process. Okay. So I had an idea in mind for some co-founders that I thought I might work well with, but then I happened to meet my co-founder Artem at a friend's cat-themed birthday party. I mean, it's San Francisco, and we just got to talking. I thought he was a really nice guy. I told him what I was like. Is kicking around this idea with no intention of us being co-founders, but he made a joke like, "Oh, are you looking for like a technical co-founder?" And I was like, "I actually am." So then the next week, I like messaged him afterwards. I was like, "I don't know if you were joking, but I'm not joking." So we mutually interviewed each other the next week. I was just really impressed with Artem's empathy and his openness. It honestly felt like we were like, we just asked each other very like deep questions like, what do you want? Like, what do you want out of this? Do you want to be rich? Do you want to be famous? Do you want impact? I mean, everybody says that they want to make impact, but like, what are the external motivations? And like, how do we make sure that like we're all both like being authentic in this partnership? Because we didn't have a friendship that we were working off before, and it worked out really well. We did basically a trial basis. Artem was part-time at Facebook, and then we really liked working with each other. We were really excited by the problem, so Artem decided to leave Facebook in March to become full-time on Canix.
Quite the just amazing experience of just finding a co-founder at a random cat party.
Yeah.
And then how you guys, so I think you really hit on something that a lot of people, especially here in the Bay Area, struggle with of if you do find a co-founder, specifically a technical co-founder, or even just before starting anything, what boxes do you need to check as far as the person you're working with, and then also the project you're working on to make sure that your values align with that person, but also the project you're going to dedicate, a good portion of your life to?
Yeah, I mean, number one thing is day in, day out, you need to enjoy working with them. Like, you need to think that they're fun, honestly. Like, they should make work fun for you. Because if it's just a grind, it's going to be really, really challenging. It can still be done if you find someone amazingly talented and you don't enjoy working with them, but you will make it work. It can certainly help. It can certainly happen, but for me, I want to like enjoy my day-to-day. So I just enjoy working with Artem. He's fun, he's open, he's transparent. I feel like we both are really competitive. We want to win. So like we have like a similar style, and we're also both very focused on like P0. I think we're both pretty efficient. So we have that kind of similar style of working which like made it fun to like work on this project. I remember we both like skipped ski trips like when we first started working together to get the MVP out. And at one point I was like, do you feel like at all FOMO that like all your friends are out skiing and like here we are like in this like cafe writing code for like 12 hours a day? He's like, no, actually I'm having a great time. And I was like, I'm actually having a great time too. And that was when I kind of knew that we had something special, because there's not a lot of people I think that you could have so much, like just enjoy working with so much. That plus like, you need to have interest in the project. Probably because of my own background, I don't think that you need to be an expert in the space. As long as you're willing to just be like customer obsessed and a really, really good critical listener. And you need to be willing to take all of the feedback. If you don't have experience in the space, you basically need to make up for that in like customer listening.
How did you gain that skill of actually listening to the customer and having the patience to do that? I imagine it takes a lot of patience. A lot of times people have an idea, they just want to run with it. How did you go about doing that?
I just started with the framework of like, these people know so much more than me. So I'm interested in everything that they have to say. And I think when you start with that framework, like beginner's mindset, I don't know anything, frankly, and like everything, then like it will become fascinating. And that's how I felt about our earlier customer interviews, and how I still feel today. Like I still feel like I have so much to learn from like every customer interaction. And
how do you keep that learner's mentality, especially now that you've been in it a little bit? It can be kind of easy for people to, whatever industry they've been in, to feel like, oh, they've been around, they've seen it. Like, how do you keep that mentality?
Yeah, I guess I just think of it like a cup that you already have full. You can't like fill with any more information.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. I'm very proud of where it is right now, but this is by no means where I want it to end. So I just think like, I haven't learned everything I need to learn to make Canix get to where it needs to be. So I need to just take the mindset I have so much more to learn, and not that I know everything, because then there's going to be no room for anything else.
Okay. I like that. I like that a lot. It sounds like it's having just the reminder to stay humble and to have humility, so you can keep doing what you need to do.
Right. When you start thinking that you know everything, I think you are really destined for disaster.
Very fair.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think that's important to ask people like yourself is how do you keep the bigger vision in mind of where you want Koenigs to go, while like being really micro and making sure that what you need to get done by Monday gets done? How do you do both?
That is a great question. And like, honestly, it's something that I struggle with. So it is really hard to keep those kind of two opposing mindsets like in your head at the same time. What I'm discovering is working well for me is just at the end of every week kind of pulling back and being like, okay, just this is a reminder, this is the vision. But day to day, really focusing on the micro, because you can't achieve a good vision, like a big vision, if you don't get the small things right. So just like I just remind myself like once every like 1 to 2 weeks, and like think like, okay, like this direction, all these micro steps, is it putting us like in the direction that we want to go to for this big vision, or do we need to adjust a little? So that's how I do it. I don't think I'm an expert in this, so like I think as with a lot of other things, this is an area where I have a lot to learn. But that's what's working for me so far.
Okay. So it's keeping the big picture in mind, but like being really focused on the micro. Question: how do you deal with like just decision making in general? Are you more data driven? Do you just what type of approach do you take? And then how do you deal with just maybe whether it's regret or just worry that it won't work out? I think for a lot of people, they want to start a business or they're working on their business, and they're around our age. They really struggled with making big decisions because they're kind of worried how it's going to turn out. How do you deal with all that?
Yeah, so I think in startups, it's important to leave yourself optionality. I'm trying to think of the bigger decisions that we have made in the past. Well, initially we considered making the whole mobile app free. And so that was a huge decision. We were going to like make it a freemium model and take a totally different model than the SaaS model that we do today. And that was a very paralyzing decision. And ultimately what we decided was we can never undo, we can undo going free, but like it will be very, very annoying to do that. We'll have a lot to do to kind of undo that. So the way that we made that decision is like we didn't have enough data to say that our other monetization strategies would support going free, so we cannot make this decision because it's almost undoable. So I think just a lot of decisions I think are more data driven, like just like, okay, there's a state here and there's a lot of licenses, so we should clearly go into that state. So I think I do tend to be more data driven, but I also try to leave myself a lot of optionality because you never know what's going to happen in startups.
Okay. So it sounds like it's a little bit of balance of both. What do you do when you find that you make a mistake? And really what I'm trying to ask is, how do you deal with failures? I feel like failure and making mistakes can be so challenging for people to mentally get through and to kind of give themselves a chance to make a mistake and keep moving. How do you deal with that, especially at the scale you're working at, right? I mean, there's money on the line, other people's money, investors' money. How do you deal with that? Yeah.
I mean, not getting just trying to see mistakes as learning experiences and trying to think, like I can make mistakes, and as long as I learn from them, I can treat it as a learning experience, because even if I make the worst mistake in the world, let's say we had made the app free, it would have been really difficult to undo that decision, but it would have been possible. So just trying to see it like, okay, I'm going to make this decision, I'm going to see how it works out, and most decisions are not permanent. Like most decisions you can deal with. So that's how I get out of like the fear of like paralysis of like failing. And like, there's definitely like regret that I have. Like, I by no means think I've run Canix perfectly so far. I just try to not. It's like a balance of being really hard on yourself, and also just like knowing that you're still learning as a leader.
Yeah. Is there like a more tactical way that you actually deal with? I do want to call it regret. Let's call it regret, because I feel like a lot of people, again, like in the startup space are just pretty hard on themselves, and some that's helpful, right? Because it's high standards and all that stuff's great. But how do you deal with some of those emotions that come up when you do look back, like from a year ago, and you made a mistake, or just a lesson, let's call it, but it really still kind of gets you emotionally. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I'd say like well, just to clarify a bit there's really no mistakes that I'll look back on from a year ago where I'll be like, oh, I wish we didn't do that, because most of the time the regret happens immediately after. It's like, I wish we didn't do it, but we're able to like adjust. Yeah. So actually there's nothing where I'm like, oh, a year ago I wish we didn't do this, because most things have changed since, like, the situation has changed since then. The way that I deal with it emotionally, like in that like aftermath, is I lean heavily on my meditation practice. I have a therapist and a coach. I do think I've got a really great best friend who's like always down to listen to me. My mom, I'm really close to, and we can talk too. So I think I have like a really amazing community around me who's like willing to like let me feel all my feelings and listen to me vent. And then like my like mental health practices and exercise, I really help me like deal with a lot of those emotions.
Okay, and I appreciate your honesty there too. It sounds like you've really set up a system for yourself to succeed, which I think a lot of people struggle with. Is answering the question of how do I create a system where you can succeed mentally going through challenges and stay really emotionally, what I would call emotionally resilient. Has that always been something that you've done, of just putting the right people around you in the support system? Is that something you learned? Like, where did that come from?
It's definitely something I learned. Okay. I mean, when I was in investment banking, I mean, this is embarrassing to admit, but I would like go into the bathroom and cry nearly every day.
That's fine. Yeah.
So I was really, really, really struggling, and I don't think I had the tools that I have now, like with like meditation and therapy and all these things. I think just realizing like having someone in your corner is really nice, like building, just like the way I think about it is like, I couldn't run Canix by myself. Like, I have to have a team in place, and like the team is essential. And just like for that, like, I think I need like a personal team in place, honestly, for like the various, like the roller coaster of a startup that I go through, and just realizing that's okay. It's not a bad thing to need help, or like to ask for help, or to pay for help. Like none of that is bad or makes you weak. It actually makes you stronger. So
I like that. It makes you stronger to ask for help and to pay for help if you need to.
Yes.
Let's talk about vulnerability. And I know that's a word that's been talked about a lot in popular culture. But how important is that in just dealing with personal fear of failure, especially starting a startup, but also just in leadership?
I think it's critical in leadership. Like, I think vulnerability is necessary for accountability, to be able to say, I fucked up. This was wrong. Yeah. Like, I should have done this differently, and I will do it better next time, because I'm the leader and everything stops with me ultimately. I think it's incredibly important to be able to be vulnerable, and I think it really helps increase the respect of your team. I do think that you need to be strong and vulnerable, but I think in saying like, I don't know everything, and I am learning, and I will make mistakes, and I need, like, when you point them out, I will be accountable and I will change. I think that's like really important. At least I know there's a lot of different ways to lead. This is just like what is working for me. Mm-hmm. And then like in startups, like how important is vulnerability? I think again, for me, it's really important. I know there's a lot of I know that there's a different way to be in startups, to be like, I'm crushing it. Like, everything is amazing. And like that may work for some people. I'm not saying it's the wrong way. I just don't think for me, it feels authentic, and that feels like an energy drain to me.
Totally agreed. I think when we were even talking about this before, when you're kind of suppressing emotions and not talking about the things that you've spoken about, it can just totally take away.
Yes.
Totally take away the energy. So how do you then encourage the people within your own company to be vulnerable? Because I know that, like, I'll be honest, like for me, it hasn't always been very hard for me to be vulnerable. It's pretty easy for me just to be honest. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people, it's a huge challenge.
Yes.
How do you get people to go and be vulnerable? Because it might be easier for you, right? It might still be challenging, but it might be easier for you. But how do you then get other people where it's really hard to be honest, especially in front of others?
I think a couple ways. First, leading by example. If people see the leaders being vulnerable and taking accountability and saying, like, this is on me, I regret doing this, I will do better next time. I think that like setting that example is really critical. And I think just in like one-on-ones, I think it is so important to just really tease it out of people. Like, as a leader, you are in the position where you need to elicit feedback. It is no one's responsibility to be like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. You need to like draw it out of them. So I think like just making sure that they feel comfortable in the environment, that they know that there's going to be like no retaliation if they're like, hey, like I need to tell you like I'm feeling discouraged, or I'm feeling annoyed, or I'm feeling however I'm feeling. They need to know it's going to be received well. So the first couple times that someone tells you that, it's like critical to establish that trust. And I think once you establish that trust, it gets easier and easier.
Okay. And who do you have in your life that you can kind of just talk to people? Yeah, just talk to someone about the challenges you go through, because I'm sure you can't talk to your team about everything that's going on with you. How do you work through that, and like how do you work with those emotions internally of just the challenges and the day in, day out?
Yeah, I mean, my best friend, shout out Alina.
Okay.
She is like my rock, and like we have a really close relationship, and so she's just like wonderful. Like whenever, like if I'm upset, like I can call her, and
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, so she's great. She's starting a startup too, New Ways
Okay.
Club, shout out. So she's like, we were able to like talk about those things together. And then my mom is a really, really great listener, and we have a really close relationship. And then my therapist,
Okay.
yeah, my executive coach. So yeah, those people are the ones that I lean on the most.
Okay. And what would you say to people that don't right now have a support system, especially they're trying to start their own thing. They think they need to take it all on by themselves. What would you say to them?
I would say you would be shocked by how honored people are when you open up to them.
That's such a good point. Yeah,
like
such a good
I am
point.
like so unbelievably grateful when someone says to me like, hey, I'm having a hard time and I want to talk to you about it. I think it's really special, and like I think it's a huge honor, and it would never ever, I think people think that they're inconveniencing people with their emotions, but I've never felt like it's an inconvenience. I've always felt like, wow, like thank you for like allowing me in and for sharing me like with me more about yourself. And so I think like even for friends that you might not even be that close to, I've never had a bad reaction when I've shared with someone like something like honest. So I think just like realizing like most people will feel very like grateful that you've opened up.
Okay. So it sounds like really it's more people will be honored that you've opened up, and that's really the key takeaway for people is that when you tell someone, hey, I'm struggling with this, or hey, I'm having a hard time, it'll actually be a good thing, a net positive than a negative.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
most people want to feel close to their friends, and I think
Yes.
like a big part of feeling close is like revealing like struggles.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Going along with that, what's it been like to be a founder as a woman? Obviously, it's more a lot of founders are men. They're typically white. Like, what's it been like with you in dealing with that? Even if it has that all been a factor. And a follow-up question to that is, then how do you deal just with doubt in general? I'm sure that might come up from time to time. How do you do that?
Yeah, good question. So, because I mean, I had an experience, like I was in finance where it was basically just all guys, like for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I think like because of that, it just doesn't even faze me at all. I actually think this is more diverse than finance. So like, I
Okay.
feel like, oh, like actually cannabis is super diverse, like in the cannabis industry. So being a founder as a woman, sometimes I think like, oh, like, are they only saying this to me? Like, would people behave differently if I was a guy? Would they like be less dismissive, or would they be less whatever? But I try not to just think about that too much, because I'm like, maybe they would and maybe they wouldn't. I can't control what people do. I can only control my reaction to it. And if people want to be ignorant, that is like their thing. So yeah, I guess it's honestly not something that's on my mind too much, because I'm like, whatever you do, I cannot control. I can only control how I react to it. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I can appreciate that. So then the follow up is, then how do you deal with just general like doubt, and when things go bad, how do you deal with that? I think there's a lot of doubt when people just want to go do their own thing or just do something different. Like how do you deal with that?
yeah. So I mean, before Canix is not the first startup I tried to start, and the first startup I tried to start, I basically just took a lot of extrinsic motivation, and I was like, I want to prove to everyone that I can do this.
Okay.
And it really was just like, I want to prove I can do this. I want to prove to myself. I want to prove to my mom. I want to prove to the people around me, like that I can start a company that can like be revenue generating. And so I don't actually think to start a company it needs to be at all like intrinsically motivated at first. I think now a lot of my motivations are intrinsic. But yeah, I guess with that doubt, I just like, in the beginning, I was just like, if I fail, it's going to be really embarrassing. And like, I just kept thinking that. And I just like said like, okay, I'm just going to like keep going. I know other people have started companies before. I think I can do it. I don't see why I wouldn't be able to do it. Like, so many people start companies who I think like are not exceptionally smart or exceptionally talented or exceptionally hardworking. I think there's really a myth of a founder that you have to just like be like amazing or like, yeah, super talented or just like really exceptional. I think you just need to be really stubborn and really shameless. And I think then if you just like persist, you will get there, like with something. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for you, the keys have been persistence. And I love that we're talking about this. It's so true. And I've even struggled with it myself, and just thinking, oh, well, like I'm not that smart, or I'm not that this, or I'm not that. And I think a lot of people go through that. Like, what would you tell someone that is dealing with that? Like, I'm not smart enough, or I don't have enough resources, or I don't have enough this. What would you tell them? Because it's so easy to say, oh, persistence, but like, I just sometimes that's like leaned on a little bit too much, although it is somewhat true. But like, what would you tell people?
I would say I wish you could see the diversity of founders that I've met like in my startup career. It's not like there's just so many people who you wouldn't think of as like classically smart or like classically hardworking. I mean, there are people when I was starting a company in Bali who were like working like 5 hours a week and had like 150K per year businesses. And like there's a lot of ways to start a company, and there's so many different types of people that start a company. So there's not one archetype. So you probably are smarter than you realize, and you probably are more hardworking than you realize. But even if you take like the worst version of yourself possible, there's probably still someone who started a company like with your like perceived skill set.
Okay, and I love that you've touched on that, because I think it's so important. A lot of the things that at least I grew up with were that, oh, you have to grind, you have to be really smart, you have to like, you know, give up like a lot of relationships, you know, just go for it. And I think, as you're saying, there's a balance of, okay, yes, you need to be persistent, believe in yourself, but you can also have a balance of like a social life and do all these other things. So my next question would be, how do you balance all of that and like having the social life and still doing all of this stuff, and how?
Yeah, I mean, I do think like in order to, if you want to balance and you still want to be like hyper productive, then you do need to like put in like some extra input. So I think hyper focus is really the key there. And I think most people, at least I'm just going to speak from my own experience. Looking back, I'm like, wow, I was so unfocused in like finance. I could have probably done my job in like half the time I spent. So, and like now I kind of wish I did that. But now I'm like, oh wow, like when I really care, like, and I'm like, really just like want to get something done, and I'm like very passionate, like I can just like laser focus and get the most important things done and like ruthlessly prioritize. And that's how I balance. I'm like, okay, like there needs to be an extra input here, and that input is going to be focus. I mean, other people have like other ways where they just like, I think there's a lot of people have a tendency to make very long to-do lists. You can probably cut it down to the top 3 things and not really have much of a difference in results. So yeah, I think that's how I would recommend balancing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ruthless priorities is what it really sounds like.
Yeah, ruthless prioritization and hyper focus.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been impressed by, even just in hearing other interviews you've done, is you do talk about like what fulfills you, and you seem to have a really good internal compass of what matters to you, why it matters. What was the process of finding what fulfills you? And just like, would you mind walking through that? Like how did you find what fulfills you? What does fulfill you? And how important has that been in your journey?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know if I'm like a little surprised to hear you say that, but also like pleased. I've never thought of I don't know if I like have the internal image that I like have figured out fulfillment for myself. How do I know what fulfills me? Well, I do ask the question every one-on-one, how fulfilled do you feel? So I guess in that I've like started to like unconsciously think like what fulfills me. And and it was also like when making our mission, I was like, we're devoting so much time to this. I want to make sure we're devoting time on an issue that like we and I really care about. And so really what fulfills me in terms of Canix is like allowing people to be more creative at work, because I know how frustrating it is to just like be doing data entry. It sucks. And it sucks to feel trapped, and it sucks to feel trapped by the systems that you use, and people spend so much time at work. So being fulfilled at work, I think, like I actually do feel fulfilled in the startup world. I feel like I can be creative. I feel like I have freedom. I feel like I have control over my time. I love the people I work with, and I feel recognized for the things that I do. So I think like the combination of those is what leads me to being very fulfilled.
Okay, I like that. I have a couple questions. Let's start with this one. What do you say to someone if they say, hey, you know what, Stacey, I don't feel fulfilled?
I say, thank you for sharing with me. Do you know what is missing in your fulfillment? And then we talk about if they know. Okay. And then if they don't know, it can be a little bit hard, and they'll say like, okay, can you think about like what like your ideal day would look like at Canix? Like if you came to work in your ideal world, what would look like? What would happen? Like, is it like, a lot of the times I think it's like recognition, like where people feel like, you know, like actually what would happen is I would do something great and people would actually recognize that. And so like just thinking about like, I'll ask them to go and think about like, what would your ideal day look like? What would an ideal month look like? What would need to happen in 2 years for you to be like, wow, that was a really great experience and I'm happy I had that. And if they do know, then it becomes a much simpler like conversation where we just talk about like what's missing, and I try to put a system in place where they can get more fulfillment.
Okay, let's double tap on this, because I think this is like a sticking point for me now. You asked some really good questions of like, what does your ideal day look like? What do you want in a month? What do you want in a year? What do you want in 2 years? I think so many people don't take the time to like get quiet, get away from the phone, get away from the friends, get away from the laptop, and answer those questions. Like, what do you think? First off, do you agree with me on that? And then second off, what do you think keeps people from doing that if you do agree?
I do agree, but I actually don't think it's an issue, because I think a lot of fulfillment starts with like extrinsic motivators, like external recognition or fame or riches. And I think that is a perfectly fine goal. I really see if someone's like, oh, in 2 years, I would have $5 million, I'd be like, okay, like let's find a way to make that happen. And I think like people think that you need to start with a very pure internal motivation, but you don't. You can like, motivation is ever evolving and fulfillment is ever evolving. So you can start with like a very, call it shallow for lack of a better word, like motivator, and that will probably evolve into like, well, I don't want to let down my team. I love the people I work with. I love like feeling like people are getting more creative by what I do. So yes, I do think that like a lot of like fulfillment might be initially like shallow if you haven't thought about it deeply. But I think it's fine to start with that. And yeah, I mean, I think like one reason that like people don't think about what makes them fulfilled is probably fear that they will never reach that fulfillment. It can be very scary to like have even the thought, wow, I might live my whole life without being fulfilled. I don't want to think that way. So it does take courage to ask yourself that question. And
to you, we can go. Actually, let's go deep into this. Is fulfillment something to really be achieved? Is it something that you can kind of live every day and win? Like how would you define fulfillment? Is it something that to you can be like achieved, like a goal, or is it more just like a daily waking up and saying I'm going to act like this, or I'm going to be this?
I think it's a combination of both. I don't think that fulfillment should be something that like, I think it should be something that you're able to live every day. I don't think it should be like, oh, in 2 years, if I have $5 million, I will be fulfilled. I think like if you're like, this is my goal, but day to day, you're like, I'm advancing myself towards my goal. I'm doing so in a way that like embodies the things I care, the values that I profess to live and the things I care about. I think you should be able to be fulfillment. When I define it, it's something that you live every day.
Okay, so it's something that you live every single day. And how have you then gotten the clarity on the values that you want to show as a leader, as a person, even as a teammate to your co-founder? How do you get clear on that?
Yeah, so I'm lucky in that my job requires me to spend a lot of time thinking about it, because it is my job to set the values for the company and to like propose the values for the company. So I do think I have a strong sense of what matters to me and a strong sense of like, I like this, I don't like this. So thinking of values wasn't actually too difficult. because I was like, I know we should all be amazing listeners. I know I want to be like focused on prioritization. I know I want everyone to feel like the company is their owner, like they are an owner of the company. Like power, like one of our like product ethoses is product powerful yet approachable, and that just, I don't want to be like it just came to me, but it kind of just is something that I feel so deeply inside. Like I think so many of the products that I use that I'm like super impressed with, I'm like, this is such a powerful product, but it's also so simple. And so just, I guess, paying attention to the things that you like and you don't like, you develop a very strong sense of like, okay, then like what value does that imply?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that you've really thought through, obviously, Canix and the values you want to have, you've done a lot. What would you say has been the best decision that you've ever made in your journey thus far, as let's say as a founder specifically?
Working with Artem.
Okay.
I mean, we wouldn't be anywhere without Artem. So I'm really glad I decided to reach out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very fair. And what have been some of the challenges that you think just people outside looking in, especially for a founder, that you've experienced that we don't see day to day?
I think like just as you grow, people always say this and like it's really hard to internalize until you're there. But as the company grows, you go from it being like a product problem where it's like 4 people just like working on a product and you really don't have that many people problems. And then you're 30 and now there's like departments that like are kind of have opposing like directives, or sometimes they like won't, their directives will kind of like butt heads, like engineering and customer support, or customer support and sales. And there's just like a lot more personnel, like, I don't want to say issues, but yeah, maybe issues to work through. So that's like been like the day to day, basically, as my job right now is you go from being like, if the company is a gun, I don't know why I'm using this analogy, but the company is a gun. You go from like being a bullet in the gun and trying to be the most effective bullet you can to being like the chamber of the gun to try. I hate this analogy.
No, it works. Let's go with it. Let's go with it.
So you could go to being like the chamber of the gun. So you need to make it like so every bullet can be like the most effective they are. And there's you won't have a perfect answer because there's going to be competing priorities. So just that day to day of like maximizing everybody's productiveness and setting the systems in place, it goes a lot beyond just making a great product.
Okay. So there's a lot of the people element that is missed when you're outside looking in, of just making sure people are productive, but also, as you mentioned earlier, feeling fulfilled. And again, it's not like everyone's the same, so it's like for each person's almost like a new project to a certain extent.
Yes.
Almost. I couldn't imagine how challenging it probably is some days.
It is, yeah, and it is. So a lot of people think, like, we definitely want to stay lean, because I think a lot of it is easier just to work with a smaller team, and I think like getting in your groove can just make everybody, like one person can do the work of like 10 people. So
that's probably true when managed correctly, right?
Yes.
When having lots of focus.
Yeah, when people are like optimized and they feel fulfilled and they're like in their zone of genius. Yeah, I really do think one can do the work of 10.
And how do you see that challenge evolving as Koenigs gets bigger? I'm assuming you guys are planning on hiring more and so on and so forth. How do you see that challenge evolving?
I think it'll become really critical to have great managers in place. I do think we have that, but right now I can still somewhat have like a view of everybody, at least everybody not on engineering. And I think I'm just gonna really need to like let go and trust like in managers a lot more, because there are gonna be people I probably won't ever meet on the team, maybe like once we get big enough. So yeah, just making sure that I have the right like leaders in place to make sure that like all of those like values continue to be like espoused throughout the company.
Okay, sounds like quite the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about just more of the day-to-day routines, habits, interests. You mentioned a lot about meditation. First off, how did you find meditation, and how important is it to you in your day-to-day?
Yeah. So I first found it in Bali. I just noticed, like, I had this thought. I was like, just a friend called, like, actually what started it was a friend called me, and she's like, and I missed the call, and then she texted me, like, she's like, hey, do you have time to talk? And I immediately, like, was, like, seized with anxiety, and I was like, what does she want to talk about? Is she mad at me? Did I do something wrong? And then, like, I went to go do something. I was, like, at a social event, and I just, like, had the, like, sense. I was like, I'm really anxious. Like, about this like one text message, and like I'm at this social event, I can't even I'm not enjoying it because I'm thinking about this. Why am I so anxious? I don't think this is normal. So I just like, and then I talked to her and she was like completely fine, like didn't want to, like wasn't upset or anything, and I was like, okay, I just like wasted an hour and a half being afraid. And I had the thought, I was like, I'm sick of it. Like, I don't want to be this anxious. I don't think this is helping me. And I think this is actually hurting me a lot in like a lot of, like, I think I have a great life, but like, I think my anxiety is just like ruining things for me. So, so I read a book called like Calming Your Anxious Mind. Okay. They recommended meditation quite a bit. And then I went to Bali and everybody's meditating there. So I got into mindfulness meditation.
Okay. So it sounds like it was a solution to a problem of anxiety. I have a couple questions. Like, we could talk about like the less serious one first. Like, why Bali? How? Like, where? How did all that manifest? Do you mind like talking about? Like,
sure.
Yeah. Like,
yeah. So after I left HIG, I had no income, and I was starting a company. And I was like, I'm living in San Francisco. It is extremely expensive here. Like, and I'm not really sure why I'm here because I'm just like writing code, and I could be doing this on the beach. And I looked into Thailand, which was my original like place. And I just read that like Travis Kalanick, when starting Uber, like went to like Thailand to go like reduce his burn. And I was like, why can't I do that? I could totally do that. And then I looked into Thailand and I just found a co-working space in Bali as I was researching Thailand that like really appealed to me. And so I actually went to Bali to go co-work out of the Dojo co-working studio.
Wow. What was it like to do that? How long were you there?
I was there for 6 months.
Okay.
It was a good time.
I'm just so curious. How did you spend your day today? Like, I don't really need to go too far, but I'm so like, like, what did you do?
Yeah, no, good question. Okay, so I wake up like 8 to 9, go like sit on my like moped, go to the dojo, work until like 12, go get lunch. Lunch is really cheap there. I did not cook at all.
Okay.
So I go get lunch and then I go work for the rest of the day. Then I would go for a run on the beach, and then I would, which was really nice, or go to the gym. I had a gym membership there. If it was a Thursday or some other day, if it was a Thursday or Friday, I would go out afterwards and like go meet up with some friends afterwards. If it wasn't, I would go back to work until like maybe like 9 and then like go home and sleep.
Wow. Sounds like an amazing.
It was a great time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, it was. I really like. I still feel like a little nostalgia for that time. It was really fun.
I don't blame you. I also know what you're talking about. Where I spent 6 months in China, and it's just.
Oh wow.
It changes. It definitely is like a landmark in your. Almost like your emotional timeline of being somewhere else, and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. But coming back to now that we had fun, coming back a little bit, coming back to anxiety. What would you say to someone that's just really struggling with anxiety? I know it's been a huge topic for just our generation of how to deal with anxiety and deal with it well and not turn to things that aren't helpful. What would you say to someone? What would you recommend, or just how to work through that?
Yeah, I'd say like initially your feelings and you're not your feelings or your thoughts. Like you're more than your feelings and your thoughts. And it's just a feeling and it's just a thought. And it'll pass like any other feeling or thought. And that's kind of the basis of mindfulness meditation. And I would also say start meditating and probably get a therapist. Like those have been the things that have really helped me. And honestly, talking to friends doesn't quite do it, because sometimes I feel like I do think we have like a kind of generational tendency to caretake other people's feelings. So when someone's telling you about your anxiety, I think a lot of friends will like want to be nice, but sometimes being nice isn't helpful. And sometimes you need like really hard feedback that you can get from like a professional. So.
Okay. And I do want to dive into this because I think it's important for people to hear this. So, like, what is without going too far into it, but like, what has the therapist been able to do for you that like talking to your friends can't? 'Cause I think people do lean on their friends when a therapist is probably needed. So, like, how do you? Yeah.
I think just for me, it's really helpful to have a more objective voice than my friends. Like your friends are like your layer cake and their layer cake, and a therapist is like a more objective voice. That's been the biggest thing for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like just having the more objective voice is what's really important.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's like, honestly, that's been the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think, again, it's a lot of people aren't getting that probably need it, and there's just a lot of stigma. Luckily, it's gotten better where there's not as much stigma around therapy. But has it always been? Has it been easy for you to talk about just having a therapist? I think a lot of people try to put that in the shadows. Has that been something that's an intentional topic for you to share? Or is that just something that has come up? Has it been easy for you to share?
It hasn't been intentional to share it. It hasn't been intentional to hide it either. It's just kind of another fact, like that I got a therapist in May of this year. So, yeah, I wouldn't say it's been hard to share. I feel like the stigma is mostly gone on therapy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I hope so.
Yeah.
A couple last questions. What books would you gift to people if you had to give? Well, first off, are you a reader?
I'm a reader.
Okay,
Yes.
Wonderful. What 2 or 3 books would you gift to people?
This is really interesting because I just gave my best friend a bunch of books.
Nice.
And 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. That has been really life-changing for me, honestly. And maybe you should talk to someone. That's actually a really interesting book about this is very on theme, but about a therapist and her therapist and her patients. And I read it on the plane back from China, and I cried the whole way. It was so amazing. So
what made you cry about it? If I may ask?
Oh, I don't want to spoil anything.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
You'll have to read it.
All right.
And then the last book, if you're a Harry Potter fan, there's this Harry Potter fan fiction called Harry Potter and the Principles of Rationality. I love that book so much. I've recommended it to like 10 of my friends. It's like, okay, I don't know how to describe it, but it's basically like it incorporates like a lot of logic principles into the story of Harry Potter, but it is not boring at all. It's like still very much the story. I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd, so and it's like an extra 2,000 pages of Harry Potter, so I was delighted. So yeah, if you like Harry Potter, go check it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were one of those Harry Potter kids.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I admittedly I couldn't get through page 50, so I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
But
I don't hold it against you.
I'm sorry to say that's awesome. Well, before we ask the final question, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you, more about Canix?
Yeah, Canix at Canix.com. We're always hiring. We're looking for unicorns and rock stars. So if you're one of those, we're hiring for positions across the board. You can keep up with me, LinkedIn, Stacey Hronowski.
Okay, awesome. So, final question: what would you say to someone that is wanting to go start a company, go and do something they're passionate about, go travel to Bali to go and meditate for 6 months, what they're afraid of, whether it's that they're going to fail, other people's judgments, their parents? What would you say to them that's really on the other side of a big decision?
I would say take a week to fully flesh out the decision, to flesh out your budget, to flesh out where you're going to live, to flesh out like how you're going to tell your parents, to like go take a week and like map out exactly, if you were to make this decision, exactly how it's going to go. And then like look at everything and then think about like what you want to get out of this decision, and then like look at all the hard things that you have to do, and if it outweighs it, then like make that decision. And you can, it doesn't have to be a whole week. I'd say take 2 hours a day for a week to think about this.
Okay. So really think it through, weigh out all the variables, and just make the decision.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd say don't make the plan before you make the decision, because I feel like it's very hard to, like it can be really hard to make the decision if you don't have a clear sense of what it'll entail. So I'd say like make out the most fleshed out plan you can. And then like, if you get excited, like do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If it excites you, do it. I love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. That was funny. Thank you so much for watching. Best decision ever, Stacey Hronowski. If it makes you excited, you've thought through it, just do it. Please, please, please take everything you've learned here today, the routines, whether it's the meditation, the books, or just the general principles and philosophies on decision making on life, and apply them to your life so you can live an inspired life yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and we will see you soon.